Welcome to the Pitch of Discontent. Owen back again for another guest episode. I am incredibly excited for today's episode. Very, very humbled to have Mike Ricketts from Planes Mistaken for Stars on the show. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a journey, So we're stoked to have this new record coming out, and we're excited to get any press we can to make sure people can hear it and get access to it.
Yeah, dude, I'm very, very stoked to be a part of that process. I was kind of chatting with you kind of off mic before that I've been a fan of Planes for years. They're a very special band, to me. And when I heard about this record, that there were rumors of this record and this material kind of floating around, but when it finally kind of came through into my inbox, I felt so conflicted in ways that I find it hard to explain. Joy, ecstatic, but also sad and mournful in all sorts of ways that I'm sure you can speak to personally, and we can get into this later. But I guess at the top of the show, for people who might not be familiar with the band or with your work, Mike, could you give us a brief introduction about who you are and what you do?
Oh, myself in general. So I'm the drummer for Planes Mistaken for Stars. And I've one of the original members. We formed way back in 1997, so we've been around the block.
Yep.
So to speak. And in general, I'm also a soil scientist. So that's like my day job these days, which I really enjoy as well. And yeah, I mean, the whole creation of this new record, I think is emotional for a lot of people. And I think like when Gared passed, like we did make this like announcement that like, oh, this record's going to be coming out soon, and that was 2021.
Yeah.
And so, now here it is 2024. And like, it's taken that long for us to go through all the hurdles and hoops to really get this thing out. So I know it's been kind of on people's minds. I'm really excited that it's finally here and it is finally coming out in a couple weeks. I'm proud of it. I think it's going to be, a really important record for the band, obviously. And that said, we're still working on other material that Gary left us as well. So we'll go from that. We can get into that stuff a little bit more later.
Yeah, hell yeah. To kind of speak to what you just mentioned, like I can only really speak for myself, but I think I speak for a lot of fans of the band in saying that like I never really felt any kind of sense of ownership in the sense of like, where's the record? I want to hear the record. It was more like take as much time as you need to kind of make it the thing that it needs to be, right? And to really kind of give it the time and the justice that it deserves. So yeah, even if it was 3 years from the initial kind of announcement and Garrett's passing to now, like I think that's time well spent because the record is phenomenal, and I think it really stands on its own, but also as a part of the body of work that the band has put together.
And that means a lot to hear that our fans and somebody who's been a fan of our band for a long time like thinks it fits in our catalog, because there are different aspects of it, right, that are we definitely took a different a different method of kind of writing, which I think a lot of bands did during the pandemic. So I'm glad that we were able to hold on to kind of our core sound.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I appreciate about Planes so much is that every record is distinct. It has its own character. It has its own kind of like characteristics, but it is still true to the band at its core. You know what I mean? Like there is a creative alchemy, I guess, for a lack of a better term, that kind of runs through all the records, but they all fit different shades of, I guess, my personality, right? Like I feel drawn to particular records at particular points in time.
For sure. And I think that's just a natural evolution that happens with not
Absolutely.
Bands, but with people and like their opinions of music over time. But especially for us, I think it also comes with like the fact that we've been playing together for so fucking long. Like, even if we haven't been putting records out for like whatever 5 6 years apart from each other, especially this last decade, we still been playing music together and playing shows, and we have all that like experience to kind of help us give a solidify our kind of sound. So
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's kind of dig into that. So
sure,
the last record the band put out was in 2016 with Prey,
yeah,
and there's roughly like an 8 year gap between that record and this record. We've got COVID in the middle there. We've got
yeah.
Gared and his health issues, his eventual passing. You've got Matt's passing. You've got so much stuff packed into that 8 year period. So, kind of take me to after Prey. What are you guys doing? When does the material for the new record start to kind of coalesce and come together?
Yeah, so I mean, so after Parade came out, Deathwish put that record out, and it was great working with those guys, and we had a lot of really good promotion, I think, for it. And we ended up doing like tours, a few small East Coast tours around here. We played Gainesville Fest a couple times. We did some one-off shows with Sounds of Animals Fighting and other just one-off events here and there. So we
Yeah,
were active like playing shows and touring that album. And then and throughout that process, I think we were kind of constantly like had songs in the back burner that we're always kind of working on at sound check and like kind of playing with a little bit. Um, and so we were kind of already in the middle of writing the record, right? And
yeah,
we wanted to put something else out soon, but we wanted to give it its time. And we were also like living in different cities at this point in time too, so it
sure.
wasn't like we could get together in a room every week and like hash shit out, right? So
Yeah,
um, and then Matt passing in 2000, God, was it 16 or 17? I think it was late.
2017, I think. Yeah,
Yeah. That was a blow to all of us for sure. I don't know how much we want to get into the details of that necessarily, but suffice it to say, he had been having problems for lots of years, and it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it was definitely like emotionally trying for all of us to learn of a really close and old and dear friend succumbing to drug addiction and suicide.
yeah,
So, and I know that Fuel the Fire and Garrett too. You'll once you hear the record, you already have the first track is purely dedicated to that
yep,
emotion. And so I think kind of the fire was already lit that we wanted to put out another record, and then it was just about the circumstances of doing it. And so Neil Keener, our bass player, he made a concerted effort to travel. He lived in Denver at the time, and he was like, "I'm going to go stay with Garrett for a couple weeks and like just push him to like write some more songs, and like we'll get some studio time, and we'll get this record done because we wanted to like get it out."
yeah,
Uh, and that was like early 2020. And while he was there in those couple weeks, the lockdown happened
yep,
for COVID. So he ended up living at the house essentially for the remainder of his time there. He ended up staying, I think, for like the next 5 years
that's
in that
crazy.
house, and it was really prolific time because they were like writing. Um, Neil's kind of like a slave driver, right? He would like make Jared come up to his room and be like, "Hey, dude, just put a guitar part down," or like, "Hey, dude, just like put a vocal line over this thing I just wrote," and like through that process, they ended up writing a shit ton of material.
Yeah,
Some of which we're still sifting through. But the Blunt Razors record is one of the products that came out
great
of that, which is
record.
really pretty slow, mellow stuff that's just Garrett and Neil. I highly recommend people checking that out if they can. But then also all the material for this new record came out of that as well. So I would go down there. They would send demos to Chuck and I, who Chuck was in Denver, I was in Chicago,
Yeah,
and I would go down to Peoria and like demo drum tracks over it.
mm,
And yeah, through that process, we ended up coming up with enough material to go book a professional studio with Sanford Parker
yep.
in Chicago, and
Who worked on Prey as well, right?
yeah, Sanford did Prey as well. That was a great time too. He was that was at Earth Analog down in Tolueno, Illinois, south of Champaign, the Hum guys record studio.
So you go to Sanford Studio, you start laying down the drum tracks, you start getting bits and pieces together. I guess the biggest kind of wrench in that process would be Gared's diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
Or did he already kind of have the diagnosis at this point?
I think Gared's diagnosis, and Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Gared was diagnosed briefly, like before we started the recording process in Chicago. I want to say that we kind of knew going into recording that we needed to get the drums down first and foremost, and then the next main thing we needed to deal with was to get his vocals, because we were unsure of if the radiation treatment was going to affect his vocal cords.
Yeah.
So that was the two priorities. We got the drum tracks down, and then once we had all that shit solidified, we totally skipped over the bass and other guitars and went straight to Gared's vocals and like got all that shit down. We kind of filled everything out after that. And during that process, obviously Gared was going through a hugely emotional, existential journey.
Yes.
And also dealing with, like, he was sick a lot, man. He was getting chemo and was dealing with all the shit that goes along with that. We've all had friends. Well, a lot of us have had friends probably that have had to go through that, and it's not fucking pretty, man.
Yeah, both my parents have had cancer multiple times, so I'm intimately familiar with how that goes, and I can imagine it was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot to deal with emotionally, and also, but Gared was like driven to like make sure that we got done what we needed to get done to finish the record. So,
and for you, Chuck, what was that process like? Did you come in, were you kind of there through all those stages? Did you come in kind of when things were mostly kind of locked in at like a demo time? How was it for you?
Oh, no, because it was like the middle of the pandemic. So I was in Denver, and those guys are like 1,000 miles away. I was just like recording parts and sending them through the email, like I wasn't really there in the same room, like we usually would be if we were writing a record.
Yeah.
So it was fucking weird, man, on top of already being weird because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
So, it gets even weirder when we found out that Gared's sick, and yeah, it was fucked up, man. It sucked. It was hard. It was really fucking hard to do. And then, you don't really get the full weight of all that shit until it's like the end of the line, you know what I'm saying? That's when it's really like, after Gared split, like that's when it's really heavy, it's like, fuck, man, I gotta record parts on this stuff,
Yeah.
But we gotta like listen to this intensely, and it's heavy, man, on top of it already being fucked up and heavy, it's like just, yeah. It was just fucked up and heavy.
Yeah. Mike kind of mentioned this kind of like existential quality to the record. And I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit, because I think all of the Plains records, reflect on mortality and death and big kind of larger than life questions, right? Like that's been a feature of Gared's lyricism throughout the entire band's history. But on this record, it takes on kind of multiple layers. You start off with the opener of Matthew is Dead, and Chuck, we were just briefly talking about Matt's passing before you joined us. So like that song in particular is so harrowing and so kind of confronting. And I'll admit, when I got the album stream, my first listen, I had to stop like halfway through that track when there's that outro bit with just like the screaming and shit getting broken. Like it was so raw in a way that like I wasn't prepared for, and I had to stop it. And I was just sitting there, and I said to my wife, who was like in the office with me while I was listening, I was just like, holy shit. I was like, this album's gonna fucking break me. This is crazy. So I guess talk to me about what that was like for you guys, being so intimately involved with it and being, you know, friends with these people. Like,
I want to start by saying that Gared like wrote all the lyrics for this record before his diagnosis. So again, like you said, like it's kind of been a theme of his. He's always thought these grandiose thoughts and thought about kind of these existential, like larger than life concepts, right? Um, so I think it's important to know that, like, you know, he was almost prophetic in some of the stuff that he was writing that eventually was very applicable to his condition after it comes out. As far as Matthew is Dead goes, like that was I'm not sorry that that affected you like that. Like I feel like then we did our job. I think it's important for people to kind of go through this kind of cathartic emotion to kind of understand what death is and what it does to people and how it affects the people who love the person who died, right? It was cathartic for us. Those recordings of us like breaking glass is we got a shit ton of our friends together, both in Denver and in Chicago, and we had everyone get together in a room and with a shit ton of bottles, and we just fucking like let it all out, you know. And that's what that is. And I hope that emotion that's conveyed through that happens in the recording. Chuck, I think in Denver, you can talk about that. We went to what there's a tunnel system in Denver that we used to do recordings in for fun on the weekends. We'd take drums down there and like do like hippie jams and shit.
What was that like for you, Chuck? To kind of like, I guess, hear that song as the album opener and then kind of add that extra raw kind of catharsis to it.
I don't listen to it anymore, but yeah, it's
Fair
intense.
enough.
Fucking, it's intense. It's hard for me to listen to, you know. But yeah, it's intense and it's meant to be intense.
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of moments on the new record that kind of hit me like that. There's a couple of tracks like Punch the Gauge, Put Your Heart on the Fire. There's really like some raw kind of vulnerable moments on the record. But I think to touch on the point that you mentioned, Mike, with most of the lyrics kind of being written prior to Gared's diagnosis or perhaps kind of in that period, like there is this idea of kind of prophecy or kind of like foreboding that comes with the record. And then, you know, obviously it's coming out years after Gared's passing as well. So there's like all these layers built around it that you kind of are forced to confront while listening to it, or at least that's how I felt. In his performance and in your respective performances on the record, was there anything that you guys had in mind in trying to like commit this stuff to tape, to get it down? Was it just kind of like, we need to get this out, we need to get this finished? What was that like for you?
You know, I don't know if I gave it any more weight than I would another recording. I knew what I wanted to do. I maybe give a little more thought to the way I wanted it to sound, because there's a variety of different types of songs on this record. So I would give more thought to like what cymbals I was using, or the type of snare drum I was using, or how the snare drums tune, and stuff like that. But I feel like, especially when it came to mixing, it became, you know, like we've been talking about, it was a very emotional process as far as like we were forced to listen to Gared's voice over and over again in a room after he had just passed, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So listening to your best friend singing to you fucking in the mixing room, you almost have to separate yourself from, okay, your mind almost separates it, and you're like, okay, I want to make this sound good. Like, what analytically do I need to do to like make this sound the best way it can? And I think that's how I dealt with it. Was I tried to emotionally separate myself from the technical aspects of recording, and just kind of focus on what needed to get done to make it a great sounding record and a good performance.
about you, Chuck? Was there anything that you were kind of thinking when you were laying down stuff for this record?
Thinking as far as like, besides like trying to make awesome riffage for my bros.
I mean, that's the basic, but I guess more like thinking of this record and its place in the band's kind of legacy, right? In the band's kind of catalog, coming years after Prey, with all of the stuff built in that we've kind of just talked about. Did you feel any extra kind of pressure or anxiety around the record, or were you just like, I'm just going to fucking rip, let's go?
Well, other than, you know, being in the middle of the pandemic and like not being able to be there and play in the same room as those guys.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to like make some cool shit because the stuff they were sending me was fucking super cool. And it already had a ton of guitar stuff on it. Most of it did anyway. And so I wanted to get to like make something that was like cool enough to fit in and like and to also serve the song, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's like a lot of the songs are pretty filled up already with guitars. And then when I got them, it was like I had to kind of pick my way through that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there was no like, you know, extra pressure, probably less pressure because we're not in the same room, and there was no like deadline really at first, you know. It was just like, hey man, these guys recorded 40 songs, you know, let's let's record some shit on it. You know what I mean? Like,
I gotta say, it was a completely different way of writing music for us. Like we weren't used to that either. Like in the past, it always been like we all get in a room together and Gared has an idea, we hash shit out, we make it into a song.
Yeah.
You know, so this whole like method of, you know, Neil and Gared had kind of having a framework, and then Chuck and I putting stuff over it was a little bit different for us, and it definitely changed, I think, the way that the songs came out a little bit, but like I think we still managed to kind of retain our core sound from it.
It's definitely a Plains record, but it's like, you know, circumstances were fucking wild, you know.
Fucking wild is fucking right.
I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. Like, what quality of the record, you know, apart from all of the extraneous stuff that we've talked about, like if we're just talking purely at like a sonic level, you know, what are some of the differences that are going on this record that come out of that different writing process? You know, does it feel, you know, like a little bit more meditative, slower? Is there more space, more kind of ambience to it? I'm interested to know how you guys feel when you stack it up against the other records.
I feel like some of the songs kind of are uniquely different from our previous sounds, right? But are somehow still us. There's a couple songs on there, and I think this stems from the way that, like, you know, Gared and Neil were kind of writing songs at the time. But there's some like ones that are like totally just like pop hooks, you know, but like let's make them fucking heavy. You know what I mean? And then there are others that are like, let's try to reproduce some fucking like industrial music and see what it sounds like if Plains were to like write an industrial song. And it's just like we try to, I think there's more like kind of experimental, like what would Plains sound like if we wrote a song like this?
Yeah.
And so I think this album kind of explores that a little bit and tries to see how far we can kind of push the edges of what we can do sonically, you know.
Yeah.
And what kind of songs we can write.
Yeah. What about you, Chuck? Is there any kind of unique quality to this batch of songs that you think makes it stand out from previous records?
Well, yeah, I hope so. You know what I mean? That's the hope with any new work that an artist makes, is like that it's going to be different, you know? And it is different. It's like a lot different. There's a lot more songs with like songs that have choruses, just like the stylistically, there's a lot, you know, different shit going on. It's not just like a freak out record the whole time. There's a lot more depth, I feel, to this record.
Yeah.
Because there's like different styles of songwriting, you know, like than what has normally happened with planes in the past. You know, a lot of the like don't have choruses, and they just kind of like blaze their way through, and you know, it's this thing which is awesome. And then, you know, a lot of the new songs have, you know, things like choruses and parts that have hooks and things like that, which is cool. And that's totally, you know, it's a lot different.
I'm interested to know, like, you guys have been a part of Planes, you know, for 20 years or more respectively, right? And the band has evolved over that time. Each of the records is like a distinct kind of snapshot of where the band was at over time. But you both as musicians are also kind of growing and changing and evolving as well. Have your listening tastes, have your songwriting kind of preferences changed over time? Are you drawn from like outside influences more than you might have been in the beginning? I'm interested to know how that might have shaped the material on the new record versus some of the older records. Chuck, were you listening to anything in particular when you were putting down guitar? Like, do you find that your tastes have changed over time?
Yeah, definitely. My tastes have definitely changed over time. I listen to music that I would never have listened to.
Like what?
30 years ago. Like a lot of, I don't know, a lot of weird jazz, and I don't know. It's like, you know, as you get older, you get introduced to things in the world, like food, you know, like, you don't just like all the time like you did when you were a teenager. I love pizza, but like, shit, there's so much, you know, I love sushi and Korean food, and I love Indian food, and I didn't get to try any of that shit until I was older, you know?
Yeah, you got to build that palate. I feel you.
For example, like things like bands like Bruce Springsteen or like the Rolling Stones. Didn't like Bruce Springsteen until I was like well into my 30s, you know? Or the Rolling Stones for that matter. I was like, fuck this bullshit, you know? I get it. It just didn't appeal. It didn't resonate with me. I didn't, you know? And then somebody, you know, gave me that Nebraska record, and I was like, oh, well, this makes sense. You know, I can like relate to this shit. And then slowly, like, I started to let more Bruce Springsteen into my life, you know?
Yeah.
And same with the Rolling Stones. And, you know, not that those are like huge, they definitely are influences, but not like, you know, massively. I don't know. I still find myself listening to like old records too, like, you know, like that Sunny Day Real Estate stuff. And
I think, like, I mean, as you get older, right, you start to realize kind of how much fucking music is really out there, and you're constantly discovering like new stuff. Yeah, I'm still like finding shit from like, I don't know, like weird fucking like, you know, East African rock and roll from the 60s. It's like, well, fuck, man, there's some crazy shit back then, you know? And it's like, so, you know, I think just being into music lends itself to discovery. And like, you're, as a musician, you're always kind of like trying to bring that into what you do. So I mean, I think that kind of applies for all of our records over time. Like whatever you're kind of listening to or most into at the time, it's like, yeah, I want to do fucking something like that. Like back in the day, like, you know, some of those early records, I was super into fucking like Neurosis and like I Hate God and really fucking heavy metal. And that I was like, I want Planes to do that shit, you know? And so I would try to push for it. But then, you know, Gared was like, oh, I'm into the Afghan Wigs. So like, what do you think? It's fucking I Hate God with Afghan Wigs. I guess Planes mistaken for stars. I don't know.
I mean, I can see that working. I can see Planes in the middle of that Venn diagram, right?
Yeah. But I mean, but also like, you know, and then like more recently, like I've been more into like kind of like krautrocky shit, like Harmonia and like Noi and stuff. And like maybe there's some aspects of that on this record that I tried to like blend in. But it's, you know, as you grow as a musician, you do try to bring all that stuff together, and that's what makes you a unique musician, right? Because you're into what you're into, and there's so much shit out there that it's always a unique blend.
I'm kind of interested to know your thoughts on the performance aspect of the band. Chuck, before you joined us, I was telling Mike how I saw the band play at St. Vitus in 2012.
Oh, sweet.
And I feel very fortunate to be able to kind of, see the band, obviously before Gared passed, but also to see the band at that point in time as well. It was a very special show and sick venue and just a great kind of experience. But I feel like the live aspect has always been so essential to Planes and to what you do, and really trying to capture that energy and that momentum on record. Obviously, circumstances have changed somewhat to the point where, is there even really the possibility of seeing these songs in a live environment? Did you guys play any of this material live before Gared passed?
No.
This is something it's a ongoing discussion.
Right.
And it's one of those things where we all wish to, in a perfect world, that we could tour this record. And play these songs live, because I would fucking have a lot of fun playing these songs live.
Yeah.
I think. But it becomes an issue of not only the logistics of trying to replace the guitar parts, and who can sing like Gared. No one has a voice like Gared.
No.
But then also like the emotional aspect of it is something I think we'd all have to like try to really grapple with.
Yeah, definitely.
To make happen. We've talked about perhaps doing a one-off show here and there sometime in the future. But again, it comes down to the logistics. So how would we do that? What would it look like? Would we be doing Gared a service, or would it be just a fucking shit show of and so I think it's hard for us to envision it, and therefore it's hard to bring it together. But we haven't ruled it out. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with it.
Yeah. What about you, Chuck? How do you feel about the prospect of these songs in a live environment?
Yeah, I'm with Mikey. It'd be great. It'd be awesome to do. I think it would be, if it was to happen, it would be like we get some special guests to sing with us.
Yeah.
And maybe get Gared's son Loki to play guitar on a couple of songs. That's something I've been trying to like work on with him, trying to get him to play some songs. That'd be cool.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it'd be amazing to do that. It'd be so cool. I would love more than anything to do that. Awesome.
I mean, look, I would kill to see it. I think it would be an incredible thing. But yeah, I can understand how trepidatious that would be to try and to make that work and have it feel right.
And then it becomes also like, is it just a one show? Is it just like a one memorial show for Gared, or is it a weekend event, or is it like, do we try to tour it? And then like, I don't know, like it just becomes like this thing that we're not sure if we're ready to tackle or not. But I totally fundamentally agree with you that like this band has always been like a force of nature, like in live performances, right? I mean, Gared was like, that was one of the first things I saw in that guy when I met him and we started the band. It's like, this guy's a fucking like natural front man. He can fucking rock the guitar and like tear his shirt off and like, like it's just like, he's like a force of nature, man. And
so are you, Mikey. God damn it.
Oh, well, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it. You too,
hell yeah. Gas him up. Let's go.
Really are,
so I totally agree with you that the live aspect would be phenomenal. It's just a matter of like logistics and trying to figure out if we can do it or not.
That kind of leads me to like my final point, which is this idea of legacy, right? And like listening to the record over and over again, I was trying to kind of see where it fits in this like story that the band's been telling from record to record. And while I was putting notes together this morning, I listened to the entire back catalog as well. And I kind of had it on shuffle. So that way it was like jerking me around from record to record, right?
Yeah.
And the thing I keep coming back to is comparing the record to Up in Them Guts, because that record turned 20 this year, and it's my favorite Plains record. It's one of my favorite records of all time. I have Gared's lyrics tattooed on me. Like, it's a very special record to me. So I guess could both of you kind of talk a little bit about that record, and then maybe where you see this new piece of work fitting into the band's legacy?
Yeah, with Up in Them Guts. That was great. That was good times. We recorded it in Nebraska in the winter of early 2004, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Mikey?
Yeah.
It was super cold and super fun. It was a really fun record to make.
Yeah.
Very
what
fun.
about you, Mikey?
So yeah, that was it's interesting to me that you mentioned and picked that record, because I feel like there are some similarities between that one and this one from the perspective of when we were kind of going into that record. So first of all, it was recorded by AJ Mogus, and we had been really into Cursive's The Ugly Organ at that time, leading
Phenomenal
up to that
record.
recording. Yeah, and so we were really playing around with the ideas of, how do we make like these songs into like be, bring in different instrumentation, chimes, timpani, lots of guitars, and just different like musical, like synthesizers. I think we started playing with like pianos and synthesizers on that record too, and try to like fill these things out and really use the studio space as like a vehicle for making the songs into something more than just like punk rock songs, but making them more organic and more like full, right?
Yeah.
And I think we tried to do that with this last record too, quite a bit, as far as like, let's try to diversify what these songs are and what we can make them into, and figure out how to produce them in a way that like kind of represents like what the song should sound like, and like explore that with using synthesizers and vibraphone and whatever instruments are at our disposal, so yeah, it's the recording of that record was a phenomenal time, because I remember we stayed with our buddy Theron too in Nebraska, and like that dude's one of the most solid dudes you'll ever run into if you ever get the pleasure of doing that. But yeah, just like waking up every day at his house and heading into the studio and working with AJ Mogus was phenomenal, and all super supportive of our ideas, ultimately. And I'm stoked that that's one of your favorite records, because it's one of mine too.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then I guess like, where do you guys see the new record fitting in terms of the band's legacy? If you're a fan of the band like I am, and you're listening to each of these records one after the other, what's the kind of takeaway that you would get from listening to the newest record?
Sorry.
I don't know, man. That's something for the listener to decide.
Yeah, that's a big question, man. Like, I don't want it to necessarily be like, oh, this is like the final record. This is the coffin in the nail. Or the nail in the coffin, I guess. The coffin in the nail. But just because I feel like it is like a piece of all of the shit that Neil and Gared were working on at the time. There's still more stuff that we're playing around with. I feel like there's more material out there that we want to do from a recording perspective. But how it fits in with the whole like history of the records that the band has put out, like you said, like it's always been a kind of a natural progression to me. Like I feel like if you lined all the records up back to back, regardless of the amount of time that's kind of between the records, it kind of all makes sense, right? Like you see kind of like when Matt dropped out of the band a little bit and other influences started coming in, but then, Gared and I have this rapport together that kind of tied everything together. Mm-hmm. So like the whole transition from fucking Fuck With Fire to Up in Them Guts to Mercy. And then I feel like Pray kind of fits right after that. And then I feel like this is just a natural progression as well.
Yeah.
So that's how I envision it. But also I encourage people to just throw it on shuffle and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could kind of offer a bit of of my own kind of perspective on it, I think for me, like, it's strangely a hopeful record, which feels odd to say because it is obviously so loaded with so much, you know, death and grief and loss and all these really kind of dark, personal, emotional things. But I feel, you know, like the title of the record is a question, and a question necessarily begs an answer. So I feel like rather than being like a final statement and this kind of like, you know, nail in the coffin, like you put it, Mikey, like it always, to me, is offering up that there's something else to come, that there is something after, not really sure what that would be, but it is there. That potential and that possibility isn't foreclosed, it's still there. So I feel strangely kind of like hopeful listening to it. Yeah.
Gared would be so happy that you just said that. Like I can tell you,
totally.
Because if anybody I have ever known in my life, he was like a person who always believed in like hope. You know, there's always something beyond that should not be scary. It should be hopeful. You know, and oftentimes it ends up being beautiful. And so, yeah, I think he'd be really stoked that you just said that.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I feel like, I don't know, like I listen to all sorts of music, right? I love heavy, aggressive music. I love pop music. I love all sorts of stuff. And I feel like the darker emotions, the heavier emotions are there to add contrast to the brighter moments, the lighter moments, and the more hopeful stuff. And like you can only really appreciate the joy in that if you've been through some shit to get there, right? So like the darker stuff always has a place because it makes you appreciate all of the good times. So I feel like that's the Plains catalog in a nutshell right there.
Yeah, totally. And like, you know, I think being in a band for 25 or 27 years or whatever it's been, like we've all been through all that shit at this stage. So we all kind of know what it's like. And hopefully, I mean, I think a lot of our fans do too, you know. And I hope the younger generation can also like start to appreciate some of those things as well.
Yeah, hell yeah. I'll put links in the description of today's episode for people to stream the tracks that are available, pre-order the record, do all that stuff. I've already got my vinyl pre-order in the post. It'll make its way down to the ends of the earth in Australia at some point in time, but I'm excited to add it to my collection. Mikey, Chuck, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, great to have. Thanks for having us. It's been great to be here.
I want to thank you for just giving us the opportunity to be on the podcast, man. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor, and yeah, chatting with you guys has been super sick. So thank you again. Subscribe now to the Pitch of Discontent Patreon to receive access to extended cuts of our bonus episodes, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes content, monthly Patreon-only episodes, member-only votes, the TPD community chat, and much more. Go now to patreon.com/TPDpod and join for as little as $5 a month. That link again is patreon.com/TPDpod. Thanks for watching the show.